Hey everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations. You with Simon today, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the full moon in Libra, and this is for the 7th and 8th of April 2020. So before we go ahead with this video itself, I encourage you to allow yourself a little bit of space to listen and tune into today's conversation, so that it doesn't just become another sort of volume of information that we're all taking in while we're all isolated and just being very overwhelmed with a tremendous amount of like I said, information just coming through. Allow yourself a little bit of space to listen to this when there is a moment to pause, when there is a moment to sit down and really contemplate and reflect. A lot of the content that I want to share with you today is not geared towards what does the future look like. It's essentially an opportunity to really come back to the self and come back to your own inner relationship to your world and what the current astrological symbolism is pointing to, and offering a potential suggestion about not only our collective evolution, but also how you are participating in your own karmic shift that is taking place in your life. So allow yourself some time just to kind of get grounded and in an undistracted way, really just tune into what I'm sharing and how that obviously translates to you, probably being the most important thing, to be honest. So I'm sure by now, all of us that are watching this video, depending on where you are in the world and what side of the coin you're looking at, I'm sure that there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty, tremendous amount of freedom and optimism and potential from the wide range of yang energies, curiosity, potential, to more of the energies of fear, noticing some fear moving through you, noticing some insecurity, maybe some scarcity moving through you, maybe some rage moving through you. Just allowing all those feelings to move through you while you witness this incredibly interesting phenomena move through the world at the moment. And it's completely natural to feel all of those feelings at this point in time. And I would even go as far as to say that when you look at the astrology, there's a tremendous amount of symbolism that points towards the necessary need to feel those things, to really pay attention to what is in your own field as you participate in this kind of collective experience that we're all going through. Okay. Libra as an archetype itself, along with Taurus, has an association with things that feel aesthetically nice, beauty, things that really kind of allow us to see the different ways that life can show up and present color to us, that can look pretty to us, that can stimulate the senses in that sense. So I really liked this image of this flower over here for many reasons. I think that the color combination of sort of a very darker gray and the pink, or pink purple as it were, I like that as it contrasts as white. It really appeases my own sense of what beauty looks like. And beauty is very much associated with the archetype of Libra as well. So that really appealed to me. And also, in a sense, the nature itself, and how nature has this wonderful way of displaying the different expressions of things that exist in the world. Okay, so like in this case, there's a flower, for instance, and its nature is to bloom. It's to reach its point of absolute flowering, and then from that process to begin its decay as it returns back to the soil, as it were. and this flower is in full bloom. And I've talked about this in recent new moons and full moons, that we're moving through what Brett Weinstein would describe and as a collective senescence. And senescence is a biological term that is used to illustrate the nature of aging. Okay, biologically, the nature of aging, and this is what we're moving through at this point in time. We're moving through a really, really deep understanding about how things have come to their full blossom within our culture, within our society, that the narratives run a specific role, and that they have now aged. And one of the things that is very clear about the nature of virus themselves, or viruses, whether it be from a computer software point of view or from nature itself, is that it does expose vulnerabilities. And what you witness in the world at the moment is a tremendous amount of attention around where things are deeply vulnerable. We all are inherently vulnerable. But if you notice that in a kind of, and to be quite honest, I don't know what is true regarding statistics, but I would definitely say that at the moment there's a tremendous amount of impact on all the people that are more vulnerable, that have got underlying conditions that have been affected by this. Again, I'm not putting in information out there that's absolute fact in that sense, because that's not the point. I'm illustrating the context of vulnerability here, and that vulnerability is something that we've definitely become aware of, not only in our own age, but in the vulnerability of the capacity for societies to withstand and support the people and the structure. How does the structure support? How does leadership support? And where are the vulnerabilities? And how can those be exposed? And this has a lot to do with our relationships to ourselves and the relationships to everything else. The full moon in Libra. I'm not sure if many of you are aware of human design, and in particular, human design in its deepest sort of core philosophy speaks about this cycle that's called the cross of planning. And I'm going to translate it to astrology, and what it's ultimately saying is that, for a very long time, we have established a societal structure in which dependencies on everybody else it is ultimately the framework for how we see life operating, and that we just take it for granted. We plan ahead, planning by looking into the future under the idea or the assumption that when we've planned that event, it will naturally just occur, and it's a matter of waiting until that time has arrives, and then we go on our holiday, for instance, or we make plans and predictions about the future as an example, and that's a trajectory, and that's what it is. Life is about that. And I think that one of the vulnerabilities that's been deeply witnessed here, and that has also come to the surface, and that is also part of a collective senescence within our societal structures and within our own deep psychological belief that we have about how we see a society operate, is how everything just will seem to operate in some way, shape, or form, and that as we participate in how it operates, meaning that how the bargains get exchanged. You go to work, in exchange for your work, you get a certain amount of money. The company has a certain contracts with other companies that support this and support that. Countries, for instance, have trade agreements, as an example, that are all related to how they get materials. There's an interconnectedness that's deeply entrenched and embedded within the way that we operate. We go onto the internet and we want to go visit a friend that lives in a different part of the world or a different part of the country. We buy a plane ticket, we download the app, we go to the airport, everything's there, we get on a plane, it runs on time, etc. And all of these things we've just kind of said, oh yeah, that's what it is. And yet now we're at a point where a lot of the things that we always just took for granted, as an example, or looked at, now becomes almost very obvious to us that there's a tremendous amount of energy that we use, kinetic energy that we use and invest into things that now almost become a sort of luxury in some way. And this is not a judgment of good or bad. It's just the nature of things. And I think that when you really deeply contemplate the context of Saturn in Aquarius, and particularly when Saturn, will officially move through Aquarius and begin to reorganize and restructure the way that we exist as a human race, particularly the kind of rules and regulations that we're going to put in place in order to, validate whatever random conclusions we come up with about what we think is right or wrong. We'll become very aware of a world that almost sees these things that we've always taken for granted as more complex in that way. Depending on the variation, there's no one size fits all. All of us will interact with the way that we interchange and interact with each other and plan things in a completely different way. The model almost. Why are you looking at this picture right now, and why did I put this up as I'm talking about this? When I studied my human design and my profile, you'll come across a thing that's called PHS, which is Primary Health System. And very briefly, what it does is it helps you establish the specificness of how your brain and cognition takes in reality. Beautiful way of actually understanding yourself at the deepest fractal level. And by the way, I will get to the astrology, just so you know, but this is me tuning into the essence here. And so as I sort of understand the nature of my PHS, there are different variations of PHS, okay, different ways that we take in reality. And for me, I have a line 6, which is shores, and it's natural shores. And to cut a short story long, I love that saying, by the way, natural shores for me brings me a deep insight into the nature of boundaries. My own personal story, I have Saturn in the 10th house, I have Pluto in the 10th house, I have the Sun in the 10th house, I have Mercury in the 10th house. So I have a lot of 10th house energy. One of the things that's been deeply evident in my life has been to be able to understand what are personal boundaries and personal space, and what's the importance of it, and how does that lead to individuality. And shores are natural boundaries that exist, because what you see here, if you look at this picture, you can see that the water itself is a different element to, say, for instance, the land. And you can see that there's natural boundaries that takes place. Okay. Again, what does this have to do with the new moon or the full moon in Libra? Well, the way that we interact with each other as a human race has a lot to do with this consistent interface between our personal landscape, our personal body, our personal sense of self, being more of the earthness, and the water would be the interface of another person's awareness, another person's perspective, another person's consciousness. So we're always consistently, as human beings, interfacing with other people's personal space. And of course, the mirror of this is that the other person's always interacting with ours. And I looked quite a lot to see if I could find the perfect picture, because I wanted to illustrate a couple of things. And I love this because it integrated the shadow. And boy, oh boy, I said this in the Pluto conjunct Saturn video that I had done about a month and a half ago, where I talked about the necessary realization of the collective shadow. And there are lots and lots of different aspects of our reality at this point in time where we get to witness these different aspects of ourselves. And the collective shadow and the individual shadow is a very, very, very deeply real thing that we are able to actually witness within ourselves. And I massively encourage every single one of you that is remotely interested in self-understanding to do some form of investigation around the nature of your shadow and how it was formed and why it was formed, because this is a Capricorn theme. And the video that I did, it's called Saturn and Saturn conjunct Pluto collective shadow. If you feel like that's something that could be valuable to you, watch it again and watch how you see the different shadow complexes show up, and how those shadow complexes have a lot to do with the nature of our personal space and how we feel that personal space being invaded or not. You know, we tend to, when we've got a authority complex, as an example, one of the things that Mark Jones was talking about in his lecture around Saturn was, for all of us that has natal Saturn in our chart, we need to come to a very deep understanding that that Saturn will always be in an infantile state unless you actually do the psychological and emotional work to throw off the perceived authority that you had as a child and all the perceptions of authority that you had, and to break down that Saturn as you experienced it as a child and begin to individuate as your own sense of authority. And again, this sense of authority itself is deeply rooted in the way that we actually understand our personal space and boundaries. So the collective shadow and the projection within relationships, because this is going to be a massive theme for us, is what we're unable to ultimately own within ourselves, whether it be that it's just too much for the psyche. And for all of us, we have many, many experiences that are in our subconscious and in our unconscious that we don't know how to process or never been able to know how to process. And so we will then label that outside of ourselves, and we will hold other people accountable for the things that we don't know how to be accountable for within ourselves. And as I said again, one of the most important things to understand about this time is that you can go out into the world and you can see it. This is this over here, the sea, literally, right? The ocean. And you can go and see that some people are advocating it's 5G. Some people are advocating this. Some people are advocating that. Some people are saying this. Some people are saying that. And what happens is that you put all of the diversity into a group, like into a container. And then you try to find some common ground between people. And the thing that appears naturally is that it's very difficult to actually find people that will agree on the same thing, because we all come from different angles and spaces. And so any sense of outer authority ultimately will never actually be completely correct for you. And if there's anything to learn about Mars's transit into Aquarius now and Saturn's entrance into Aquarius, is that your sense of individuality and the way that you actually understand your sense of individuation process, which, by the way, to be 100% clear, I don't mean, oh, I like, Nike shoes over Adidas, as an example, and that's what makes me different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your personal myth. I'm talking about your personal story, your own personal sense of self that you have and its relationship to the deeper storyline that you carry as a human being. What's your fractal about? Who are you? That's an amazing question that you can ask yourself. Who are you? And some people might turn around and say, well, I'm a mother. And say, no, I didn't say what you are nurturing. I said, who are you? And person will say, well, I'm a graphic designer. So say, no, not what society has defined as a role that you live by, but who are you? And this is something that's very profound, because who are you is a very deeply inquiring question into the essence of your being that once you start to learn to become more conscious of through active observation of yourself, and I don't mean your psychological preferences, I mean the actual essence of your being, you will start to see that this story of us all being on earth, all jammed in a Facebook thread, for instance. I mean, the reduction of our capacity to understand the depth of ourselves is reduced to posts that we make and the points of views that we have, and how other people's points of views will disagree with that, and then the need to fight and argue and point fingers, etc. This is all the shadow complex in this interface of Libra, personal space, boundaries. This is about inclusion and exclusion. And so we are in this very peculiar space right now where the vulnerabilities that are apparent to us, and there are many different like levels to this conversation. I've honestly thought about how am I going to talk about this without being completely real with what I feel, sense, and think. That's my 2 cents of what it is that I'm observing. And it seems to me that we are very much, and I've shared this before, we're very much in a place right now that we get to see ourselves. There's a mirror. And if we're looking close enough in the mirror, if we're looking honestly enough in the mirror, we'll see that everything that rubs us the wrong way, everything that crashes onto our shores, notice the crashing onto our shores, is telling us something about our own selves. So in each interaction that you have, let's say somebody says, oh, this situation that we're experiencing in the world right now is because of this. And then let's say, for instance, you have a knee-jerk reaction to that, and well, that's not true, or whatever it is that your response is. Ask yourself, why is that response the way that it is? Why am I responding this way? What is inherently my own personal philosophy or truth? Again, with Saturn, with Jupiter conjunct Pluto at this point in time. And again, I'll show you the chart, guys. So, what's the internal question? How are we able to see what's coming onto our landscape? Where's the personal space that we feel is invaded? Where have we not been able to transmute the shadow complex of our own personal sense of authority in ourselves, that then becomes the need for us to ask other people to be the authority, or to regulate themselves so that we can feel regulated? I was thinking about this a lot. Capricorn, the archetype of Capricorn and Cancer, and the natural squares to Libra. So Capricorn sits at the top, Cancer sits at the bottom, and then if you make 90-degree angles, which I'll show you in the chart, you'll see that there are the Libra archetype itself manifests how we need to tell other people to behave a specific way so that we can be regulated for ourselves. And this is something that's important, because think about it. What are regulations? If you look at when you travel on the road, for instance, and somebody behaves in a way that puts your life in jeopardy, do you tend to go, oh yeah, I noticed my need for safety wasn't met? Or do you go, oh, you idiot, for behaving in that way that almost made me crash, as an example? Do you see it? It's completely natural and part of our more primitive states. Our limbic system ultimately is the thing that governs us. As much as we would love to consider ourselves to be massively rational in our process, ultimately everything is rooted in our emotional sense of security and sense of survival. So now, the next time you go onto the internet and you sit and just objectify and observe people interacting with each other and the way that the media is presenting things, and the angles and the specific propaganda that's being used to share perspectives for things, ask yourself the question, what's the agenda? What's the underlying reality? And how am I interfacing with this? Is this true for me? How is this information landing on the beaches of my own shore? You know, as you can see here, as we interact with it, how are we receiving things? So you can also think about something like on the beaches as well. You'll notice that there are certain places, like a port, for instance. A port is a specific area of land in which ships arrive, and these ships would be considered a trade route for where other commodities that are maybe not necessarily part of the land would arrive at a land and say, hey, by the way, we're willing to trade with you. Remember, it talks about this dynamic nature of trade and interaction with each other. Libra is the archetype of our capacity to discern whether or not the trade that we wish to take is something that's meaningful and purposeful for us or not. So there's a very strong association with the dynamic of how we actually relate. And it comes down to the boundary, the two different realities as well, and how they meet. Do they meet in a way that's soft and sensitive and open, or do they meet in a very rigid and defensive way? And we are witnessing all of this. This energy at the moment that's present for us is giving us the opportunity to see how we relate. And then to even add to that as well, it shows us, the energy reveals to us that we are also in a very deep collective shift, a change. Okay, so let me go over to the chart for us. Just get... So, as you can see, you've got the south node over there sitting at 2 degrees Capricorn. It makes a trine to Uranus at 5 degrees Taurus. That's an Earth trine, by the way. And Uranus is ultimately creating this impulse to liberate ourselves from the past emotional and psychological investments in the structure. Okay, so whenever we experience sudden awakenings and shifts around the way that we have established things in the past and the old, like things that we've done in the past, the choices that we've made, the patterns of behavior from the past, and how those impressions have been internalized by us, as an example, all of that type of stuff is just coming to the surface of Uranus and just like kind of spitting it out, saying, hey, by the way, let's liberate from that. Let's change that. Okay, so Uranus trining that south node suggests the necessary need to see the patterns of the past and to ask yourself the questions, is this really essential for me right now? Is this really purposeful for me right now? When I think about the trines that Venus now in Gemini is having towards Pluto and Mercury, not Mercury, but Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars over there. This is, firstly, the Venus trining, the Saturn dynamic has a lot to do with, and the Mars dynamic has a lot to do with air energy. So the distribution. But more so deeply, the moon in Libra reflects to us that as we are shifting into a new direction, we're also very aware of the way that our boundaries operate and the personal space that we're willing to hold within inside of ourselves, And where is your boundary? Where is your shore, as it were? Right? Where is the beach front? What is it able to allow in? And what are you ultimately saying no to, as an example? And then to go deeper into that, it asks the questions, how are you making the choices based on regulating your own emotional reality? Because think about it. We all have a nervous system. And the nervous system itself is operating at a autonomic level. So if your environment suggests, or if you're taking in any information that suggests something that's really, really threatening, then your nervous system itself is going to begin to operate in a way in which this perceived threat is going to influence the brain's psychology And this is going to impact us. This is what this energy is doing at this point in time, right? The symbols are reflecting to us that if you really pay attention to what you're taking in and allowing in on your shores, know that that's going to psychologically affect you. And that in itself is then going to lead to how you actually find inclusion or exclusion. You know, which people are on your fractal. This is what I would say would be the kind of highest level, the sense of what this chart symbolizes in its highest essence or its deepest essence would be that it's through relationships and personal space and understanding yourself do you begin to know who you are and what you're not. Okay, so you can go through a series of relationships. How many of you have been in a relationship or have been in a few relationships until you got to a relationship and you went, okay, you know what, I've been through a couple of tries and now I have a better sense of myself and what I like and what I don't like. So inherently in all relationships, we begin with dysregulation. You know, we begin with disharmony, and then as we go through experiences that the relationship teaches us, we become more conscious of the things that are our behavior patterns and not. And that leads us to finding better ways of relating in more harmonistic ways. And I would go as far as to say what it seems to me like now is that we are observing a very interesting emergence within our collective psyche in which what people belong in our fractal and which do not. And it shows up as the different multiple perspectives that exist. So do you subscribe to this? Do you subscribe to that? Do you subscribe to that? And at the same time, are you aware of your vulnerabilities as well? Like, for instance, this is a channel that talks about astrology and looks at life through this lens, right? But the shadow side of this, the shadow side of what I'm sharing over here, the shadow side of what I would consider to be the shadow side of it, at least, is that it's very difficult for somebody to show up and say, well, how do you know it's true? Because most people are already resonating with this fractal as it is. So it can be easy to create a kind of echo chamber in which the sense of what's being shared over here must be the absolute truth, which it's not. It's just it's a way of interpreting the phenomena of reality using, you know, a specific orientation. And it helps us process things. It helps us make sense of things. And I suppose on some level, why I'm sharing that is because it's been very deeply embedded in my awareness to not want to create a type of message or a type of conversation over here through this YouTube channel that suggests and advocates that, you know, this is the absolute truth, because it isn't. It's just a way of how we can find practical solutions to make sense of reality as we see it for ourselves. And so this is an aspect of reality, and we have an interconnectedness. And we can all see that we all have something in common in terms of our interconnectedness. We're all sharing this realization that we all just took travel for on face value. We just, you know, we did things and they were just always going to be there. But now through this collective experience, we see our interconnectedness. We see our relationship with everything. And yet at the same time, we're also very aware of the diversity that exists as well. I saw a really funny meme today, which said, there were a couple of things that said, and one part was like, what this virus has shared with us is 40% of the population think that the world's going to end. 40% of the population think that it's just a joke, you know, it's a hoax and it's not real, it's fake. 20% of the population think it's 5G or it's this or it's that. But one thing that we all seem to have in common is that the solution to the pandemic is buying toilet paper. And I think it summed up the astrology chart very clearly. So here's my conclusion and my summary for today's astrology and for this new moon. It's the awareness and the emergence of interconnectedness. and the challenge and road that we all partake and journey on to understand our role in the specific interconnectedness that exists for ourselves, meaning that different people's perspectives, different people's ways of looking at things exist in a time space. And if that's your fractal, if that's the people that you feel that you belong to and that help you manifest your reality or make you digest your reality, then that's what you'll gravitate towards. And other people that disagree with that in that sense should be able to do that, but at the same time, we find ourselves also resonating with what is correct for us. And I don't think this is something new. I think it's something that we just become very aware of intensely because of the nature of social media. And the shadow that inherently emerges out of that process is the inability to accept the differences, because it affects the emotional regulation, our nervous system. It affects the way that we are threatened, and that we don't necessarily know how to label our own essential need in that moment. And so it becomes something that is the responsibility of another person. And so we begin to police each other. And the capacity to police each other at this point in time is just nuts. So here we have Moon at 18 degrees, Sun's at 18 degrees. It squares the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. It's in a cardinal sign, so it speaks to the capacity for a shift in the way that we operate. Mercury comes along and it makes a connection to Neptune, and it suggests to us that all relationships that we have teach us about ourselves, the things that are healthy about ourselves and the things that we need to integrate into ourselves to become more conscious and holistic. And the trials and tribulations that are associated with the different ways that relationships teaches us about who we are, so that we can find the people that we resonate with, the people that we're meant to belong with, as it were. Because there are only a handful of people that we can really click with in that sense. A large percentage of the people that we interact with, that we would label as friends, as it were, are really just associations. Because we don't generally tend to open our deepest stories to every single person. It's people that we can truly feel safe with, emotional regulation, that we can trust, that we would talk about the deeper parts of ourselves. And finally, I would say that with Chiron's transit through Aries, this has a lot to do with humanity and society's ability to begin integrating the new world in which we are participating in, and to realize that as we begin to navigate ourselves through this time, that people will show up that are natural leaders. I've seen a lot of people at the moment that I've communicated with at this point in time that have suggested that this is the time for them to really lead with the things that they know are essential. And I agree that Chiron and Aries energy, especially for those of you that have actually got Chiron and Aries in your natal chart, that speaks to the process of awakening that is rooted in your ability to see your purpose now. As the new world is dawning upon us, you have the capacity and the capabilities to be able to emerge from your own shadow, as it were, and step up to the plate and actually begin sharing your ideas and themes and perspectives and supporting and being of service during a time in which there is a natural need for that. So, there's a beautiful trine that's happening between Venus and Aquarius at the moment in time. So I suspect that, I'll be interesting to witness how much information becomes more available to us now, while at the same time, also how we start to see the diverse perspectives become more and more evident at this stage. And again, Jupiter and Pluto have now made their conjunction, which there was a video that was recently released. It was called The Unveiling. If you haven't watched that, I highly encourage you to watch that. talks a lot about um, the veil being pulled over, or at least away, and now we're seeing it for what it is. We can't hide anymore. And because we can't hide anymore, the truth becomes apparent. And I think that this is going to be a time where the truth is going to become very, very apparent. Cool. All right, my friends, thanks very much for taking the time to listen to me today and share the things that I wanted to share. I wanted to encourage any one of you that has wanted to study astrology, you've maybe never felt that this was the timing. On our website, myself and Jen, on our website we've put the astrology school. The first video, the first model of the archetypes is available on our website that you can actually go ahead and watch. So if you would like to learn more about astrology, if you would like to study with us, on our website we've put the first module of the Aries archetype free and available to watch. So you can get a sense of how I teach it, and if this is something that you're really interested in that sense. So I'll put the link to our website for you to go and watch that Aries video, considering that Chiron is in Aries and the sun's in Aries. There's a lot of value in that. And that link will be in the description, as well as the comment section below as well. So you can come check out our services. We're always here ready to help people process using astrology. If you feel that that's something that's valuable, we are actually offering all of our services at a sliding scale as well during this time. So I encourage you a lot to do that if that's something that you feel is needed for you, using human design, using astrology, whatever your preference is. Okay? All right, everybody. Have an amazing day, and we'll speak to you in another video. Take care. Bye-bye.